In this edition of the Red and Blue Political Roundup, the stage is set for President Trump's first veto. The Senate voted Thursday to block the president's national emergency declaration to build a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. He issued the declaration after Congress denied his original request for $5 billion in border security funding. The vote was 59-41, with 12 Republican senators voting against it. Here's how some lawmakers reacted to the vote.
I want to tell you, with respect to this emergency issue, the fact is that the president is trying to rewrite the Constitution. The Founding Fathers made it clear that Congress was to be in the business of appropriating funds, not the president.
President Trump will prevail. His veto will be sustained. Maybe we can change the statute in the future to help alleviate some of the concerns, but I just want my colleagues to know I appreciate and respect your concerns, but I don't share them.
Andrew Desiderio is a congressional reporter for Politico, and he joins me now from Washington. Andrew, thanks for being with us. Help us break down this vote. What are you hearing from the lawmakers on the Republican side who decided to vote against the president's declaration?
Well, first off, this was a wide array of Republicans. You mentioned there were 12 of them. They span across the ideological spectrum and across the seniority spectrum. You have conservatives like Rand Paul, who voted for the resolution of disapproval, and moderates like Senator Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who also voted for it. You have brand new senators like Mitt Romney, who's only been in office for a couple of months, and you have Senator Roy Blunt, who is a member of Senate Republican leadership. So you had a wide array of Republican senators voting for this resolution of disapproval. I'll also note this is the second time in just 2 days that a bipartisan majority in the Senate issued a pretty stinging rebuke to the president. Yesterday, the Senate voted to cut off U.S. support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, and the only reason why it passed was because many Republicans, including some of the 12 who bucked their own party today, voted for that resolution as well. So it's another continuation, sort of more and more Republicans feeling more comfortable with going against the president.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Well, President Trump tweeted that he looks forward to vetoing the resolution from today. What are you hearing about that?
Well, White House officials are already hinting that the president could veto this measure as soon as tomorrow. Of course, as you mentioned, he will proudly veto it. He could set this up sort of like a bill signing ceremony like he would at the White House, where he brings reporters into either the Oval Office or into an extravagant room inside the White House, gives a speech about it, and then proudly vetoes it. And this is a good way for the president to showcase what he thinks is a winning issue for him politically.
Let me also switch gears here and ask you about Campaign 2020. Former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke announced Thursday that he is running for president. What does he bring to the field for Democrats?
I think he shares a lot of the same political talents as Donald Trump, ironically. The first thing is he draws insanely large crowds. The second thing is he's a really good fundraiser. You'll recall last year when he challenged Ted Cruz in the Senate race in Texas, he pulled in something like $80 million, which is unheard of for just the Senate race. In addition, this issue of electability will come up. Of course, he lost in that race, but he only lost by 3 points in a red state like Texas. So he can take that argument nationwide. Depends how he frames it, of course. But I think those are his strengths coming into this race. And, this idea of Beto mania that has popped up, obviously during the election last year and ever since, because he did a counter rally against President Trump in El Paso, his hometown, just a couple of months ago. And this has been sort of bubbling up where he's been considering this.
And O'Rourke appeared to have a lot of momentum, as you know, following his unsuccessful bid to unseat Texas Senator Ted Cruz. How is he looking to turn that into support, though, for a presidential bid?
Yeah, you make the good point. It's very different, right? And he feels like this issue of border security is a winning issue for him, just like Donald Trump feels like it's a winning issue for him. As I mentioned, he's going to start with a very big advantage when it comes to fundraising. His name ID is much higher already than many of the Democratic candidates who are in the race, many of whom have been on the political stage nationally even longer than Beto O'Rourke. So that's something that I think will help him as we get into these nominating contests in the early part of next year.
So O'Rourke spoke with CBS This Morning co-host Gayle King in his first interview since announcing his campaign. And I want to play some of what he had to say about impeaching the president.
You had said earlier that you thought President Trump should be impeached. Do you still feel that way?
It's beyond the shadow of a doubt to me that if there was not collusion, there was at least the effort to collude with a foreign power. Beyond the shadow of a doubt that if there was not obstruction of justice, there certainly was the effort to obstruct justice, whether that's firing James Comey, the principal investigator into what happened in the 2016 election, or in the light of day tweeting to your attorney general, as President Trump did, to end the Russia investigation.
Because you know Speaker Pelosi's gone on record. She does not think that's the way to go at this particular time.
How Congress chooses to address those set of facts and the findings, which I believe we are soon to see from the Mueller report, is up to them. I think the American people are going to have a chance to decide this at the ballot box in November 2020, and perhaps that's the best way for us to resolve these outstanding questions.
Interesting to hear that answer, Andrew. What is the message that he's sending to voters and Democrats in Congress with that position?
I think that's something you're going to hear from a lot of 2020 Democratic candidates, this idea that, you know, I don't want to focus on impeachment right now. I'm not serving in Congress. You know, that's for those folks to decide. I'd rather beat him at the ballot box in 2020, which is what I think that's what Beto O'Rourke is trying to convey. Of course, last year when he was running against Ted Cruz in that race, he was running as a very, very unapologetic progressive, which, you know, the conventional wisdom was in a state like Texas, that kind of politics would not sell well to voters. Well, it sold pretty well in the sense that he came within 3 points of beating Senator Ted Cruz in a red state. So I think he's going to be able to break through some of these more established norms of Democratic politics going forward. And I think you saw that reflected in his answer, this idea that he would rather, just like all the others would, beat the president at the ballot box.
Finally, Andrew, I also want to ask you about former Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker, who met with the House Judiciary Committee Wednesday. Now, the committee's chairman, Congressman Jerry Nadler, said Whitaker did not deny that President Trump called him to discuss Michael Cohen's case in the Southern District of New York. The Justice Department disagrees with that. Are you hearing anything more from lawmakers about this?
Well, I talked to a couple of Republican lawyers who were in the room, that is, lawyers who work for the Republican side of the House Judiciary Committee, who said essentially that Chairman Nadler's description of some of these events was not entirely accurate. So, unfortunately, we won't get a transcript of this sit-down interview that they had, that Matthew Whitaker had, that is, with the committee. So all we have to rely on is the interpretations of the people who were in the room. The one thing that they did agree on, which was fascinating, was that Matthew Whitaker cast doubt on the scope of the Southern District of New York probe into Michael Cohen that involved campaign finance violations. The word that both sides used was that they said Matthew Whitaker called some of the claims against Cohen specious. That was Matthew Whitaker's word, of course. So I thought that was the most interesting revelation out of this, because it's the one thing that both sides actually agreed on in terms of how to interpret what went on behind closed doors. But again, we will not get a transcript, so it's tough to say exactly what happened other than what the interpretations are of both sides, and both sides have their own political incentives to spin it the way they want.
Is there any reason to think that lawmakers will ask Whitaker to meet with them again?
So Chairman Nadler said that going forward they're going to analyze what they heard and then follow up with him if necessary. Again, since we won't get a transcript, we won't know exactly what might need to be followed up on. So at this stage, they're still, I guess, reviewing what they were told, and there hasn't been an announcement on that front. But I wouldn't be surprised if the chairman wants to bring him in again to clear some things up, or ask him for some documents that might back up some of those claims.
Right, to be continued. Andrew Desiderio, thanks very much, Andrew.
Thank you.